It was a normal day for me. I enjoyed walking in the forest. It was an activity that, for me, was calming. It also gave me the chance to brush up on my local biology, identify local species, and catalog them for fun. There was nothing strange about it. That was until I came across a tree. This tree stood out among the others in the forest. Firstly, it was in a small clearing, separate from any others, but even its look was strange. It had a mixture of thick long needles, short and stout maple-like leaves, and many other leaf types of different shapes, colors, and sizes that came across the entire canopy of it, unlike anything I'd seen before. Its bark was somewhat smooth compared to regular bark. Rather than being broken into several sheets like the pine I had mostly seen around the area, or being rough with flaky paper-like layers like the maple or dogwood, it had smooth, single-piece bark that had a looking texture of relatively high-grit sandpaper. The tree was also built somewhat strangely. It wasn't short by any means, but compared to the pine and maple around it did not stack up, although it was quite thick for its height. Its limbs were short and spindly, jutting from place to place out of the trunk with little care to growth that typical trees did. Overall, the entire specimen was strange. I had never recalled seeing anything like it, but then looking around I saw something else. There seemed to be a small trench of upturned dirt that came from one direction out of the base of the tree for several feet, though the trench looked old, grass starting to grow over the exposed soil. The entire thing was so strange I did not want to conduct anything on my own. I marked the location on my GPS and left to get some backup to examine it without the risk of damaging it. A friend of mine was a botany professor at the local community college, so I asked if he would be willing to come and look at the specimen with me a few days later, and he said he would. So, a couple of days later, we both brought our outdoor equipment to set up a small camp and observe the specimen. It took about an hour to get from the road to the clearing. The GPS malfunctioned a few times getting up there, so we had to luckily stumble upon the clearing rather than perfectly finding it. We set camp up a bit into the woods out of the clearing. For some reason, a lot of the electrical equipment we had was malfunctioning, mostly the satellite devices like our regular phones, satellite phones, laptops, tablets, and others. Normal electronics worked fine, and it seemed like our radios worked unless we were on separate sides of the clearing. After examining the tree for a few minutes, I noticed how the tree seemed to be in a slightly different place, off by a few inches. Looking at the trench, I saw that it had indeed moved slightly. While pondering this, my friend, who will now be referred to as Davy, noticed something as well. Half of a squirrel's corpse. Looking at it, it appeared as though it had been torn in half by pure blunt force pulling. We both had seen things similar to this before, so we figured some coyotes had been playing tug with the body and fought when it got torn in half, so we continued. After the first few hours, with a gloved hand in case the tree was poisonous, Davy touched the bark of the tree. For only a second his hand seemed to be stuck in place, but after that moment it was free again. We assumed the sandpaper-like texture of the bark had simply snagged into his cloth glove, and ignored it. Davy had concluded he had never seen any species even close to this tree before, and he wished to stay a few more days before returning and getting more eyes on it. I agreed and had packed for that anyway. I wanted to stay to look around the area anyway, whether that was his choice or not. We spent the last few hours doing sketches of leaves, branches, and the entire tree. Several times we noted leaves falling down and drifting onto the bark of the tree where they would stick for a second, before being let go just as quickly and falling to the ground, noting that the texture must be exceptionally rough. We elected to head into our tents for the night. I woke up to a large amount of rustling coming from outside my tent in the clearing. I figured it was a bear, so I stayed in my tent and waited until eventually it stopped, and I went back to sleep. Waking up the next morning, I left my tent, and to my shock, when I looked into the clearing, the tree had vanished. Left in its place was a hole around the same circumference, and the top part of a deer's head, just the top of the skull and antlers, still bloody and steaming. Both Davy and I elected to leave as swiftly as humanly possible, so we packed up and left. It was days after. He had texted me a few times, saying that we should head back. I'm sure what happened, whatever it was, has cleared. Imagine what we could discover. Who knows what lies at that site, one of his texts said. I ignored him mostly. He was in the fervor of a discovery. Even if it would not be safe, I figured if I left him, He would burn himself out of the excitement and we could properly adjust our strategy and continue in a few weeks. That is what I thought would happen. Yesterday, a week after we first went to look at the tree, Davy called me. It was around 8 at night, though it was summer so it was not quite dark yet. Man, you have to come out here, now. I was just able to get to my phone. I went back for it. He was yelling, panicked. You went back? What's happening? Why didn't you call 911? Why are you calling me? I said, beginning to panic as well. Just come. I came here with the saved GPS, but I left it over by our campsite when I came to the clearing. I don't know where I am. Please, just come here. He was even more panicked than before, frantic. I came as fast as I could, making it back to the spot in record time, and I came to an awful sight. Davy was at this kneeling on the ground, one hand laying flat, fingers spread on the tree. I could see spikes that seemed to jet into his hand, locking it in place. Even worse, I saw the tree moving slowly downward into the ground. Man, you gotta help me. I came back and I saw it had come back in place. I wanted to record the texture, so I placed my hand. It got stuck for a second, so then I tried to move it. Then I felt a sharp pain in my hand, but now I can't feel it at all. What's going on there? He said. I leaned over to look at his hand closely. It was evident that spikes were inside of his hand. It appeared burrs around 1/4 inch each. Dozens, hundreds were embedded diagonally into his hand, with strange blue clouded liquid dripping from them. What do we do here? I said, confused by so many details of the situation that my mind could not keep up with the pace, as I saw that even in the minutes I was here, Davy's hand had gone down another 2 inches. Pull, please, just pull, help me, he said, pleading. I acquiesced and grabbed his hand at the wrist, and with all my strength began to pull. Remembering what had happened with the glove, I placed my boot on the tree for more force. For a moment it seemed to work. His hand was ripping, yes, but coming loose, until a creaking sound emanated from the area his hand was embedded, and the burrs grew. They grew and grew until they were almost 2 inches each, all sticking out of the end of his hand. Despite the awful sight, Davy said he could still no longer feel it. Okay, in my tent, there is a box. Bring it here. It's red and metal. It has things we need. Bring it now. He had a deranged calmness to him, until the end when he screamed at the top of his lungs. I quickly went to his tent and found the toolbox. I brought it to him just as quickly. There is a bushcraft saw in there, a folding one. Get it out, he said, having had to get into an uncomfortable position as his hand had sunk in even deeper, partially lying down. No, Davy, you can't. There has to be another wadash. He sharply cut me off, reaching into the box, shifting his box, causing a loud pop to come from his arm, though he did not seem to react to it, pulling the saw from the box. Please, he pleaded. I wordlessly took the saw and opened it, placing the teeth at his wrist. At the first couple of motions the saw ate into the flesh, blood came pouring, and the sound was misery. I dropped the saw. I can't feel you, you have to, I'll die. Davy's eyes stared deathly into mine. I can't, I shriveled cowardly away. I couldn't bear to even see what was happening. My body would not allow me. Davy looked me in the eyes and took the saw. He somehow stood. It was obvious from sight and sound the maneuver had dislocated and likely broken his wrist. He put the saw in the same place, and with a sharp determination powered by whatever the numbing liquid was and adrenaline. He made progress until, jumpy from his surge, he tripped. Falling, he caught himself with his forearm, placing it onto the tree. Quickly, several-inch burrs dug deeply, though they had no liquid yet, as he screamed. It had been several minutes and Davy was lying flat on the ground, his hand and arm only an inch or so each from the ground. There's a pistol in the box. Please, we saw what happened to that deer, and that squirrel, what that thing will do to me, he said, silenced by a quiet thump. His arm had touched the ground. This I could do. I took the pistol, a simple Glock-style handgun, I do not know the specifics of it, and I put it to the back of his head. Thank you for this, he said, closing his eyes, waiting for release. My pleasure, Davy, I said, squeezing the trigger, expecting a loud bang, but was surprised instead. I heard a thump as the hammer and the slide caught on the barrel. No, he said, no, 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 no. The sound was interrupted as a grinding noise took over, enveloping his hand and arm into the earth, slightly deforming it, but the arms gave far before the earth could. With spurts of blood, I could only sit and watch the ground eat Davy. For several minutes, I watched as he wailed and was being crushed like trash. No, please, no, he screamed until another crunch, the loudest yet, came, and he was silenced. I only watched another minute, as his feet dangled into the air as most of his body had been swallowed. I ran quickly from the scene, terrified, bloodied, unable to think. I woke up the next morning, having nightmares, simply having the night play, and play again through my mind, and so, I alerted the authorities. Davy had gone on a hike and hadn't contacted me. I told them the wrong trail. After finishing my call, and having to go in for a statement about his missing persons, I finally got back home. There, I deleted the location off my GPS. So please, if you have seen this tree before, trust me, you didn't see anything.